the human race, becomes a fellow human being with you, and your feelings begin to accept that. Somewhere along the line, you're going to get the power to wish that person well. And the first time you feel that you can think of the person who hurt you and just wish or pray that something good could happen to that person. Maybe the good is the good that he will not do it to anybody else. When you reach that point, you know you're on the way. That's what forgiving is to me.
My brother Larry bought my mother a car. She was older, and they were always talking about getting her a smaller car. And she was getting kind of fragile as she was older. Well, my brother bought about 6 cars at once and turned in her wonderful old Cadillac that the windows went up and down with buttons on the doors, opened and closed easily, and she was used to driving it. He got her a Chevrolet that was 6 inches shorter, and the doors practically knocked you down, and the windows you had to crank. And I can't really forgive my brother for that kind of stuff. He's done lots of other stuff, but that one in particular is what I just want to stay away from him. You know, and I do.
One rule that I have about forgiving is that you only forgive people who hurt you. Larry hurt Guy's mother, but when you hurt my mother, you hurt me. Okay, hurt my kid, you hurt me. So I think what Larry did to his mother did hurt Guy, but I get a sense that it wasn't just what Larry did. I think Guy is stuck on the not very nice person that Larry is. And that's tough. You can forgive people for what they do. It's very hard to forgive people for what they are. I don't think that God forgives us for what we are. I think God forgives us for what we do. When it comes to what we are, He accepts us. And accepting somebody is not the same as forgiving them. You forgive something they did that they were responsible for. You accept them in spite of, and sometimes because they're really wonderful human beings underneath all of that. And I hope that Guy will one day gradually get to the place where maybe he discovers that he doesn't have to forgive Larry. Maybe all he has to do is say, Larry is a faulty, blemished human being, a lot like me. And then say, so we're on the same wavelength, so I'm not going to carry this grudge against him, but that doesn't mean I have to like him. We'll get together at Christmas time, but I don't have to be a close friend of my brother. But I love him, and if he's in trouble, I'll go to help him.
Stop with that one for right now. Joyce, you flip the lights back on.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So pointing the right way.
I want to address that. I'll just stay back here. I don't know if y'all caught one of the first quotes there. But I want to reread it here. I've got it written down here. Forgiving is going to a person either in your fantasies or in reality and saying, I don't understand. I'll never understand. And it wasn't okay and it isn't okay. But I forgive you. How many of you have thought of forgiveness in that way?
I have to do that with my sister.
Okay?
Sure. I have a sister that tells me like that.
But we don't know where they are in their mental psyche, and there could be other things going on within them that's causing that.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, kind of like that. I love you, but I don't like what you do.
Okay, could be that. I love you, but I don't like what you're doing right now, certainly. This idea of this ties in a little bit with the whole forgive and forget. Does anybody need pens or something? I apologize. I meant to pass those out. But I think that this is a very important point, and it begins with this, and we'll hear it again. This is an extremely important point when it says, I don't understand. I don't understand what you did, or I don't understand why you did what you did to me. I don't understand where that came from, but it's not okay. Too often, at least the conversations I have with other people, the conversations I have sometimes in my own mind, run something more along the lines of, well, you know, they're going through this or that, or they're having this or that. I need to just be okay with what happened. We need to try. We try to convince ourselves that we need to just kind of accept it and get on with it, right? And we're going to talk more about what truly needs to be forgiven, because somebody cutting you off in a conversation is not something that needs to be forgiven. That is not what we're talking about. But when we are talking about something that needs to be forgiven, it's important to be able to say, what you did is not okay. It wasn't okay then, it's not okay now, and it won't be okay in the future. But I'm going to choose to forgive.
If I were God.
Uh-oh. A lot of heresies have started out this way.
If I were God to make forgiveness perfect, what you just said about, you know, that you say you're flawed and all that, but I'm going to forgive you. I would want you, the offender, to say to me, yeah, you're right, I did hurt you. Yeah, you're right. I did act that way. But what happens usually is that they don't even acknowledge. And to me, that's the core of forgiveness, is that all of us just want that person who has done something really deeply painful to us, not the superficial cutting in, to acknowledge that indeed they stepped on my feeling or they hurt me. But usually that doesn't happen. And so to me, that's why forgiveness is so difficult.
You want them to seek you.
That's right. I can say to you, I forgive, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I want you to say,
you to forgive.
yes, I want you to acknowledge you did me
Yeah,
wrong.
there's definitely a desire in most of us for the other person to acknowledge. And it goes along the same lines, quite honestly, towards what we talked about with revenge. That seeking vengeance, seeking to right the scales, right? We want them to come and grovel and say, boy, I was terrible and I'm so bad. We want tears in their eyes and we want them falling apart, because that's what we think they've done to us, and they need to hurt at least as much, if not more, than we are. But the thing is, we don't ever see them hurting enough to make it right. That system doesn't work because we don't know the turmoil that they're going to, and given the hurt we've had, we probably don't trust what they're doing, so forth and so on. But you're exactly right. That desire.
Somehow, even if you see them hurting, it doesn't make it any better.
Yeah, it doesn't. It does make it better.
It doesn't really make it better.
And the joy that you find in that momentarily usually makes it worse later on that night when you stop and examine yourself.
I think there's occasions too where you put your standards on somebody else. Their standards are not the same. So therefore, they don't even recognize the fact that they've hurt you, even though they've hurt you terribly. And that, who am I forgiving? My expectations?
Yeah.
Is that what I'm having to do?
Yeah.
Because that person has no idea really that they hurt me like that.
Yeah, that was the next point I was going to make. Same exact thing to her. Most of the time, people don't even have a clue they've hurt. They're happy as a clam over there, not even recognizing until we start acting like a pain in the rear. What's going on here?
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened here, but apparently I've offended them somehow. Yeah.
Shouldn't you examine first if your feelings are justified?
Sure.
Start with yourself.
Sure. Did everybody hear that? Said, shouldn't you start with examining your own feelings to know if they're justified? Certainly. That is a part of it.
We always feel
Yeah,
like
that's always a piece. And as we talk about what does it mean to forgive, what is the grounds of something that needs to be forgiven, that's a piece of recognizing our part in it. But it's important to remember, though, with forgiveness, it's not always just us. We do have to be able to acknowledge the hurt. We have to be able to blame the person. Okay? Some hurts are not just ones that we just say, yeah, that's really more on me. Sometimes it's not all on us. And the reality is, for most of us, some people are extremely good at forgiving. Some people it comes just so naturally to it. You know? It's just how they're made. It's the gift they have. And that's a wonderful thing. But that's not most of us. And that person's going to struggle in some other area of their faith in life that maybe you wouldn't. But we always have to examine our part in it before we move forward, certainly.
I think
Somebody?
that my mother taught me a trick that I try to remember, don't always remember it, but when that hurt comes, is to think, what is going on with them? I mean, yeah, I might have heard them when they lash out at you. What is going on with them? And usually you'll find out there's something going on with that person that they lash out at you.
Yeah. The quickest way to be right in terms of forgiving others is to not get hurt to begin with, right? That's the simplest path. So there's a lot to be said for not being so easily offended, not being so sensitive to the world around us, certainly. But that's not the answer to all of life's issues or hurts or problems either. So we're talking about the things that go beyond that. And as I said, this isn't about, well, somebody cut me off or somebody's talking during my presentation. I'm not going to forgive acting. That's not what You're always you get the point. Now, the second quote that I wanted to discuss with you real quick was with Guy. The first one that presented, his name was Guy. And Lewis's comment on it was that you can only forgive people for what they do, not for who they are.
That's a tough one.
What did you think about that? Because that one kind of, I guess I hadn't really thought of it in that way exactly. What did you all think about that?
Well,
You can't forgive someone for who they are.
Well, that was the closing statement, wasn't it? But I interpret that as that God forgives us all for what we do and not for what we are.
Yes.
And that was what I heard anyway.
Yes.
And I had a big question mark in my mind because of that. Because I've always thought that we are judged by our actions, but then to go beyond that, our actions are dependent upon what we are.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I question that statement.
Okay. And I think it is a debatable statement. But if you harken back to the New Testament, when Jesus talks about
Quoting that scripture.
how do you know someone's heart? What does he say? How do you know if your heart is right in the Lord? Or as we look around, how do we know? Anybody think of?
Intentions.
There we go.
Fruits, by the fruits.
By the fruits that those lives produce. So while certainly what Kurt is saying is true, we're judged on who we are, how we love, what our intent, what was internally. But as Luther attested to, and James writes in it, that who we are will come out in the works that we do. Maybe not every individual case, but when you look at a person's life in total, say that the works that you do when people are looking and when they aren't, says that's the test of who you are. Now that doesn't mean that we get to heaven or we please God by our works. It simply means that who we really are, that eternal piece of us, that soul that God is concerned about, that who that really is will come out over time. That you're judged by the fruits of our lives. So in that sense, his statement does make some sense. But it's certainly a debatable statement in how you interpret it and what he exactly means, for sure. But I think the point that he's trying to make is simply that God accepts us, much like the best example I have is a parent and a child. I don't think my children are perfect. Most days I think they're way far away from me. But I love them because I love them. I love and accept them because I choose to, not because of what they are or aren't. And I think that's what he's talking about, accepting. And I think ultimately, love is any loving relationship, whether it's spouse, friends, parent, child, whatever, has to be based on that. We love because we choose to love, because that other person is not perfect, will not be perfect. They're going to do things that hurt us. They're going to do things that irritate us, etc., etc. We choose to love. People don't earn love. We choose to love.
But that's a human love. God is all-knowing and all-forgiving.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't, what I didn't like about what that man said was, it's kind of like, well, I'm a terrible person and God accepts me as a terrible person. I don't think he has labels.
Mm-hmm.
What did Jesus say on the cross? That I forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
Yeah. I think what he's saying is that we're forgiven, right? We're forgiven for our actions, and therefore we're put right with God. And then at that point, God accepts us, if you will. You know, as our saying, we go warts and all, right? Through God's mercy, we're forgiven, and through God's mercy, we're then accepted. It's not that, okay, you know, God forgives Patrick tonight when he kneels down and prays, and all of a sudden now Patrick is perfect. No, it doesn't work like that. Patrick is still a flawed human being. But God loves and accepts us in that. And I think that's the acceptance he started. It's not accepting our actions. It's not saying what you do or your shortcomings are okay. And I think it's the same thing with forgiving. When we say to someone else, I accept you, we're not saying I accept everything you do as being okay. We're saying I accept you in the sense that I'm going to choose to love you and be in relationship with you. As he said, in spite of.
Yeah, in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
That makes sense in relation to their actions. Like you said, you don't have to be your best friend, be your brother. You can live in what kind of relationship you can, and you can be okay. You don't have to feel guilty about that.
And I think if you think about forgiveness, there's some element of it that we can relate to. It's impossible to forgive someone for who they are, because as soon as I forgive you for who you are, what are you now? You're the same person I just had to forgive for who you were. It doesn't work.
Right.
You can't forgive somebody for something that they're going to the very next second be doing the same thing. They're still who they are.
yeah.
And so forgiveness is for
Actions.
It's for particular hurts. And that's why I think he's distinguishing them. That's why I think he's saying we have to accept people for who they are if we want to be in relationship with them. Just as I think the point he's making is God accepts us in that way. Because we're still who we are.
But what if that person never acknowledged or accepted that they hurt you and never talks to you about it?
Yeah.
How can, I mean, do you just confront them? Because I never could.
Yeah.
And so therefore the hurt is still there.
Well, I think that's part of what this process and this program will talk about. Forgiveness in the sense that we're talking about doesn't require anything from that other person. So you can forgive someone who's dead, someone who lives on the other side of the world, someone who's living in the house with you. It doesn't matter. The process is the same because it's about giving up on our right to get even and then getting to the point where we can wish good things for them. None of this process,
you, not about them.
Yeah, none of this process has anything to do with what they do or don't do.
Right.
And I know that that's a hard thing to swallow. But I think if you live in a system where we say, okay, if someone comes to me and they're sorry enough for what they've done, that's not really forgiving. Okay? That is somehow in your mind you've determined that the score is even. We've settled up. That's something different than forgiving.
But the good news about that, though, is then you're not dependent upon them coming to you saying, you know, will you forgive me or I'm sorry. You no longer expect that, and you're in control, so to speak, of the forgiveness piece. So that you can that hurt can go away because you've been willing to forgive them without them having to do anything.
I think
To me,
that
that's the good
happens
news.
as you grow older. As a young child, it's terrible. As young teenage friends, it's horrible. But as you get older, I think you just, well, for me it was, it was just a total different thing. I don't have that feeling in myself. If I've hurt somebody, then I want to let them know. But if someone hurts me, I don't know. It's strange, but it's very different than when I was younger. I mean, I can remember times when I wouldn't talk to a good friend for 2 weeks because she looked at something or said something, and that kind of thing. But it's just not that way. It's
Age brings
I think
wisdom.
it's, yes, and it's a very personal person thing. Somebody, I mean, I've talked with some friends about it. And I have a good friend that really has a horrible problem with it. And I just, all I can tell her is to let it go.
I think one of the, not necessarily to comment on what you said, but I do want to point out that forgiveness is something we can get better at. It's something we can grow into. It's like any other muscle. The more we use it, the more we have success with it, the easier it gets, and we're able to forgive more easily. So I think that's important to note. The last question that was on there that we didn't talk about, that I want to talk about because I want to leave you with some homework to think about. The last question there, name the best example of forgiveness that you can think of.
I think Charleston is what happened with those 9 people that were killed at a Bible study, and they let that white boy come in and sit down with them as an act of faith, and then he ends up killing 9 of them. And the way the people of Charleston handled the entire deal, and they weren't a Ferguson.
Okay.
I mean, I think that is one of the most supreme examples of forgiving I've seen in a long time.
All right.
And worldly thing.
Yeah. What else?
Yeah, a person that I knew very well had a problem with an uncle. And even though her brothers and sisters forgot about this, and she never did, she carried this for somewhat, maybe over 25 years. And finally, I guess God got to her one way or another, but she truly forgave this uncle. And then after that, she said as if some big burden was lifted off of her shoulder. Something she's been carrying for 25 years, she was relieved of that burden because of her forgiveness.
It takes a lot of emotional energy to carry around hate with you all the time, or frustration, or disappointment. And you hurt yourself more than anything. When you were asking before, why do you think Jesus asked, or God asked us to forgive? Well, I think it's for our own health, quite honestly. Kurt's right. I do think that when you're not burdened with that, well, you just feel better about everything. Because it's an emotional strain.
Yeah, that hurt, that anger, that can come out in all kinds of different ways, and shame and all kinds of things, and that affects every relationship you have. There's no question about that. Other examples of forgiveness.
I was really moved when Mark and I went to Pearl Harbor, and we saw some of the very last survivors, and they were in the presence of the survivors of the Japanese people who had bombed Pearl Harbor and who had killed their friends and teenage boys who were sitting there. And it took me a long, I don't even know if I can comprehend that still, but I just kept on thinking about that. How do you end up forgiving such an atrocity that happened and move forward? And yet these soldiers and sailors that we got to see had done that. And to me, that was such a profound example of forgiveness, and a type of forgiveness I don't know if I have within me.
What else? Anybody else have one?
I
Jocelyn?
think we left one off up there, sensitivity. You know, it might be easier to forgive somebody than to be sensitive to others' needs. And it struck me that our daughter home one time said, Mom, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. And I couldn't think what she'd done to hurt my feelings. She is the sweetest girl, our oldest one. Sweetest girl. How we got her, we don't know. But anyway.
I figured it out.
Was she adopted?
Anyway, I said to her, when did you hurt my feelings? There was a lot going on in the house, as there always was with poor kids anyway. But then I got thinking, what a lesson learned. Because I thought, if she's that sensitive, how often do I hurt her feelings? And I'm not even aware of it. And it taught me a lesson in sensitivity, but I thought, we don't have that word up there, is to be sensitive to others' needs. And I think growing up with a mother that was lame from polio taught me that lesson too. I think that lesson came from a long time ago, but then that daughter really brought it up that, you know, have I hurt, Mom, I'm sorry. What? I didn't know, I still don't know what she did.
The thing that I want y'all to go home to think about, to wrestle with, to write down questions about, to think about, is the example of forgiveness of Jesus on the cross. It's the ultimate example. If we believe what we say we believe about it, that he had done nothing wrong, and yet still chose to accept that for us, for our benefit. As you said on the cross, forgive them, they know not what they do. Think about what that kind of forgiveness means. Think about where that comes from. And as we talked about earlier, why is that so important? Why is that so important? In order to be right with God and with one another. That's your homework, to think about that example and to try to put that into terms of how we forgive, why we forgive, and why we should forgive. Okay? Let's close with prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for the love, for the forgiveness that you showed to us time and time again. Pray that you'd fill our hearts and minds with the knowledge and understanding of that love. Help us learn to forgive one another as you've forgiven us. Help us to learn to forgive ourselves. Help us to reach out, love and compassion to those who are hurting, who are trapped in shame, despair, anger. Help us to share this gift freely with the world around us. All this we ask in your Son's holy name. Amen. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Wes.